Manchester for organizing such a great event. My name's Bethany. I'm head of purpose, inclusion, and impact at Bruntwood and Bruntwood SciTech. And so that means I look after our social impacts strategies as well as our diversity and inclusion strategies. And I've got the immense pleasure of working alongside our 6 colleague networks to deliver against our diversity and inclusion initiatives. So for those of you that don't know us, Bruntwood is a family-run property company based in Manchester, but we work across the UK. And we've always been a bit different because we've always had a real focus on our purpose, which is creating thriving cities. And we're really clear that we can't create thriving cities if we don't also look like the cities and resemble the cities where we operate. So that is the real energy behind our diversity and inclusion strategy. We want to make sure that we are representative of the places where we work. We want to make sure that we are creating spaces where people can come together and have cohesive conversations to address some of the biggest challenges that we have. Yes, in our cities and local areas, but also nationally. And so we're really, really excited to be having this conversation with Pro Manchester, and huge thank you to Catherine and Toby for giving their time and for having these conversations with us. And it's great to have all of you here as well. You'll see a little bit more of me at the end while we go through questions. So this is just a bit of a plug to say, if you have a question for the speakers, feel free to pop it in the chat. I'll be going through them throughout the webinar, and at the end, if we have time, we'll see how many we can get answered. So that's enough for me, but I will pass over to Toby and Catherine.
Thank you. Toby, would you like to go first? Intros?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. So my name's Toby. My pronouns are he, him. I run my own workplace inclusion consultancy, have done for the last few years. Prior to that, I was an in-house diversity and inclusion manager for the BBC and Deloitte, the big accountancy firm. I've also got a background in technology. So I actually kind of intersect my technology experience and my EDI experience together, which is quite topical because we're talking about intersectionality today. I've also, in terms of my personal intersectionality, I was born with a rare neuromuscular disability. I've been a wheelchair user all of my life. I have 24-hour care. I'm also a gay man, and I'll be talking a bit later today about the intersectionality of disability and sexuality. Catherine?
Thank you, Toby. So, hi everyone. My name is Catherine Millen, and I am the founder and company director of Be What You See Consultancy. We are a workplace discrimination prevention training company. And it's really quite topical for me today to be talking about intersectionality, because I think it's because of the multiple identities that I hold is probably one of the reasons why I work in the space of social justice, EDI, and workplace discrimination. As you may have picked up already, I do have a bit of a Scouse twang. So I am from Liverpool, but been in Manchester for the past 12 years. As a Black woman who also is neurodivergent, is a lesbian, I've had kind of multiple experiences throughout my career, where I've experienced different challenges and barriers from the workplace. And it was mainly because of those reasons that I did decide to take the leap and set up my own business and become an entrepreneur, and essentially just create an environment that allowed me to thrive no matter what my background or identity was. So I'm really I'm really eager to talk to you about this particular topic today, to add some insights, not just from my own lived experience, but also my journey as a company director of, now managing a team of 14 people. I've had to put in things in place to make sure it's inclusive as possible for everyone, but also making sure that it's a workplace that I can thrive as well. So yeah, really excited to get started.
Thank you.
Do you want me to take a...
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
I think the way that we're hoping to go through this session is really just to hear some of your insights together. But feel free to let us know if there's another way we can chime in or ask questions.
Oh, thanks. Catherine, do you want to flip a coin?
Yeah, I'm happy for you to go first, Tony. We'll do you go, I go.
Cool. Yeah, we've worked together in the past, so we can just we bounce off each other.
Yeah.
So I think one of the first things that I'd like to talk about is there's very often a common misunderstanding about what intersectionality really is. Um, Intersectionality itself is a term and a concept that was actually created over in the States as part of the kind of race relations movement I think it was in the 60s. Um, and one of the misunderstandings about intersectionality is that it's about individuals ticking several boxes. So I might say that I can tick the I have a disability box. I could also tick that I'm a gay man box. Um, I could also tick that I'm white British box. And it's not about what boxes we tick, but it's about how our different characteristics and identities intersect to create compounded experiences of prejudice and discrimination. So, my
Mm,
experience as a gay disabled man is very different to a friend of mine who has got the same disability as me, is also male, but is British, Asian, and straight. So, I haven't received any racism in the same way that my friend has experienced. Um, he hasn't experienced homophobia in the same way that I've experienced in the past.
mm,
So I think we have to get really clear on what exactly intersectionality means. And one of the
mm,
kind of things that I think we need to talk about is the degree to which people have to really expel a lot of effort in trying to hide or cover or downplay certain aspects of themselves in order to
mm,
quote unquote fit into the
mm,
culture of an organization. So
mm,
when I grew up, because I have a physical disability, that was very consuming for me. It was always kind of in the foreground. Um, and it was always the main thing that people noticed, and it was what had to be dealt with, if you like, as I was
mm,
growing up through like medical interventions and surgery and things like that. And because that was in the foreground, a huge aspect of myself in terms of my sexuality was actually suppressed and put into the background. And I spent a lot of effort having to hide that um, and cover it up, if you like, which was very energy draining. And I didn't come out as a gay man until my late 20s. And it was only after a near death experience, having got pneumonia and spending 2 months in a coma, did I come around and go, I cannot spend the rest of my life hiding an important part of myself and downplay. And the way that that shows up in the workplace is that if you imagine that you go into work and you're kind of sat around and everyone's getting their cup of tea or cup of coffee in the morning on a Monday morning, and somebody says, "Oh, so what did you get up to on the weekend?" It's those kind of very natural, informal questions that we ask. An individual might feel like they can't disclose what they got up to on the weekend because they feel a sense of shame about their identity. And we're talking quite specifically about LGBT today.
mm,
So somebody might go, "What they might not feel able to share what they got up to on the weekend because they have that sense of shame." The only other point I want to make is intersectionality has such a massive impact on how people feel in society. So one of my other roles is that I chair the Manchester Disability Collaborative, which is it's a it's basically a bunch of disabled people, disabled people's organisations. It's Manchester City Council, it's statutory bodies like the NHS, housing providers, and we're all getting together. And our mission is to make Manchester the most accessible and inclusive city in the country. Um, and in our research, we looked at poverty rates, for example, and this is such a worrying statistic. So disabled adults are 7.3 percentage points higher, more likely to be living in poverty than non-disabled people. So if you're disabled, you're you're more likely to be living in poverty than a non-disabled person in Manchester. But if you're black and disabled, you're 16% more likely to be living in poverty than white non-disabled people, which is a staggering um, gap. And the extra cost, if you've got a disabled person living in your household, you're going to be spending on average about £1,000 per month more per household. So what does this actually mean for employers? Because we're here together as kind of small and medium-sized employers. What that means is I think you have to be really mindful about the positive impact that you can have on society. If you're employing disabled people, for example, you are playing a really important role in their lives in terms of their kind of economic power and their spending power in society. And I think if we consider like the vast majority of employers in the UK and certainly Manchester are small employers, large employers like the ones I used to work for, the BBC and Deloitte, are actually in the minority. Most of us work for a small or medium-sized employer. So small and medium-sized businesses have a huge impact on how people feel in the workplace, whether they can bring as much of themselves to work as possible, and whether they go home and they can fully participate in society. And they've got the spending power and the economic power to live independent lives. Catherine, do you want to take over?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think just to touch upon some of the things that you were talking about there, Toby, I think a concept which quite a few people might be familiar with is either the term called code switching, or sometimes in the neurodivergent community, we use the term called masking. And I think I just wanted to build upon what Toby was saying, I guess the mental overload that takes. And it's not just about somebody coming into work and doing their job. It's almost the kind of cognitive overload that you have thinking, I have to hide this part of my identity if you don't feel comfortable just being your true authentic self. And for me personally, when I set up my business, we're still a small business. We've only been running for 4 years. And one of the things that I guess was quite adamant on, and I wanted to build from the very beginning, was psychological safety in my workplace. For those of you that are unfamiliar with psychological safety, it's essentially a framework that is being put together that breaks down what psychological safety in the workplace means, and there's 4 different stages. One of those stages in particular talks about inclusion safety. And what that basically means for me as a company director is, what practical things am I doing to ensure that staff can always bring their true, authentic self to work? So, what measures am I taking to normalize diversity, to normalize the diversity of thought, and to create an environment where people can come in and talk about, their experiences outside of work or their experiences inside of work, and not feel they have to hide that part of themselves. So for me, one of the ways in which we do that at Be What You See is we are very clear on kind of what is the expected level of behavior and inclusive language. So we do quite a lot in terms of training on microaggressions. And in my company, we make sure that everybody feels that they can be their true authentic selves, and they're not the part of their identity, or not the brunt of, banter or any jokes or anything like that. Or even just if people have a diversity of thought, then that is respected. And I think when we're talking about intersectionality, and it's something that I'm going to kind of revisit throughout this webinar, it's also around thinking about, well, how do people experience discrimination? And actually, what can we do in the workplace to tackle that? And for me, part of it is just recognizing how that type of discrimination, how things like microaggressions present. I've got ADHD and dyslexia, and there have been times when I've walked into a space and I've heard quite negative comments around ADHD, kind of headlines that you've seen in the media. And instantly that has given me a feeling of feeling othered in that space, like I don't belong. And almost leaves me with this feeling of, actually I don't quite feel safe here in my head. So it's things like that that when I go in and I deliver training to people and we talk about, well, how can we make our workplace safe? What are the things that we can do? And for me, a starting point really is just simply the language that we use in terms of the understanding that we have about people's life experiences who do hold multiple identities or maybe have life experiences that we're maybe not aware of, but we act in a respectful way.
I think something else worth considering is around intersectionality is about seeing the whole person and their multiple dimensions and making sure that we are giving individuals access to spaces and opportunities. So, for example, I've worked in organizations where we've got staff networks. So we've got like disability networks, gender networks, LGBT networks, and such like. And the LGBT network has organized an event, which is great. And I felt like I could go along as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. But then the event was held in a non-wheelchair accessible space. So they
Mm.
hadn't thought about accessibility of the event itself. Also, I've worked for an organization that thought about diversity and inclusion in a very siloed way. So their focus was on, at the time, was very much on gender, particularly around promoting women into senior positions in the organization where there was a lack of representation. And then they were starting to look at becoming an anti-racist organization. And one very senior leader said to me, we're doing all this great stuff. Inclusion is really important to us, but right now disability is not important. It's not priority. And as a disabled person, I felt completely offended by that. Like, how can I work for an organization that on one level is saying inclusion is really important, but on another level saying it's not because disability just isn't important. It's not a priority here. And that experience played a really active role in me deciding to leave that particular employer and leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. So we have to be thinking about what kind of environment as employers are we creating for our people? Are we creating an environment where we're actually showing respect for all of aspects of your identity and who you are? Are we creating an environment where you feel like you really do belong here and you can do your best work? Um, are we really empowering individuals to do their best work and deliver value for the organization? That that helps our businesses grow and prosper. And are we creating an environment where I want to stick around. I want to grow in my career. I want to progress. I want to develop. Um, and so intersectionality is not this kind of academic topic. Um, it has real practical implementation implications for employers, whether you're small or medium, about whether you're getting the best out of your people. Because you might see an individual and you might make a judgment about that individual based on their physical appearance. Could be their race or ethnicity, could be their accent, it could be whether they have a visible disability. But actually, are we taking into consideration some invisible aspects of themselves, their sexuality and invisible disability, um, whether they're working class or not, that kind of thing, introverted or extroverted, grew up in the countryside, grew up in the middle of the city. Um, and are we creating an environment where people can bring as much of themselves to work as they want to in order to thrive?
Yeah, brilliant. And I think one of the things I just wanted to, I guess, build upon there as well, I think it starts even it starts at the stages of recruitment. So even my own personal journey before I started my own business, I worked for really large organizations. The last person that I worked for was the University of Manchester, over 13,000 staff. And I always remember um going through the kind of the application stage and having that question around my sexual orientation. And I remember the hesitation and not necessarily wanting to declare it because there was an apprehension of, oh, okay, would this go against me? Why are they collecting it? What will be done with it? Does this mean people are going to know they're taking away from me the opportunity to be able to come out? And it just added quite a lot of pressure. And even then, when we were started with like the onboarding process, one of the most valuable things that I took in terms of those first couple of weeks of recruitment was the signposting of different staff networks, different groups that I could join that weren't just given specifically to me because of obvious part of my identity. It was almost just presented as a list of these are all the different staff networks, these are the different initiatives, and it's up to you which one do you want to join. I had a really supportive manager at the time who from day one just allowed me to be my true authentic self. Um, she was very supportive in terms of understanding the barriers within the organization that I would face, both as a woman, a black woman. I didn't have a diagnosis of ADHD and dyslexia at the time, but that manager intervention was really, really important for me because for one, she created a dynamic where I, first of all, didn't have to tell her about what the barriers were or the discrimination. She actually went away and did the work. And she created a supportive environment to me to always let me know that if I did experience anything, she was a safe space to go and talk to, that there were systems and processes there. But then she was also very proactive in terms of, right, let's look at promotion. Okay, Catherine, what are we actively going to do? What barriers are we going to anticipate that you may experience in addition because of the multiple identities that you have? And that for me, and Toby talked before about certain things that have happened in your career that almost become a deal breaker on whether or not you stay for an organization. I would probably say I've had the a positive side of it because of those people experiences of managers and people who just come in and see me for my true authentic self. But like I said, actually do the work to go away and understand, okay, what are the stepping stones that Catherine may have to take. And I think another important thing that I want to kind of talk about as well when we're talking about intersectionality, I think it's to always ensure that people feel validated in their lived experiences. Um, for me, sometimes I will experience barriers because I am a woman, but also because I am a black woman. And what's really, really important for me is the people who I go to speak to them about those experiences, even though they might not understand because they might not have that lived experience, they always validate it and they always ensure me, or they always kind of give me the right advice and guidance, or signpost me to the right support, and kind of reassure me that it's not just in my head. It wasn't, a joke or banter or anything like that. And I think that's something really important as well. To just kind of be aware of how discrimination and how microaggressions present for people, just so you have that awareness of then how to support somebody if they are speaking to you about it.
Oh. Um, so a phrase that I often hear in recruitment is whether or not you're hiring somebody because they are a quote unquote culture fit for the team. And what that's code word for, are we just about to hire somebody who's like us? As human beings, we are born with a set of inherent unconscious biases. It's just the way that our brains are wired. It's also down to social conditioning, the societies in which we've grown up in, and what we've been exposed to in terms of um, people in power, role models, TV, media that we consume. Um, we've all got these biases. It's not our fault. In some situations, they can help us. In other situations, they can hinder us. We just have to be aware of whether it's hindering or helping in the moment. But it comes up a lot in recruitment, and we have this similarity bias. As human beings, we find comfort and safety by hanging out with people that are just like ourselves. And so what we do is we end up creating in groups and out groups, and we end up recruiting people in our own image. So this phrase, culture fit, comes up quite a lot. and it's code word for I'm just about to hire somebody who's just like us, thinks like us, behaves like us, has similar background to us. But if we really believe in the power of diversity, like we know that diverse teams outperform homogenous teams. We know that diverse teams are just better at problem solving. They're more creative. They're more innovative. Inclusive cultures retain people for longer. We get the best out of people if they are working in an inclusive environment because people feel like they can contribute their ideas and suggestions without any fear of backlash. So all of this helps. So we need to be thinking about if we're recruiting, are we recruiting people that can actually add to the culture of a company? Can they really help us bring our values to life if we've got a set of values and we use them? But from an intersectionality perspective, are we actually about to recruit somebody? Can we recruit the whole person? You know, are we recruiting them because we have a shared characteristic or identity? So if I was to come and work for your organization, um, you might think, okay, well, we're both part of the LGBT plus community, so we've got that similarity. But are you also being welcoming and accommodating of my physical disability as well? Or are you asking me to park that at the door? You're saying it's okay to bring your queer self to work, but in terms of your physical disability, we feel really nervous about talking about disability. We're worried about saying the wrong thing. We don't want to cause offense. So we're going to avoid talking about disability. We're going to park that at the door. And so I think when we're recruiting, that's really important. And this is just as relevant for small businesses as it is for huge organizations. If you're a small business, you might not have like a formal official recruitment process. You might not have a complicated applicant tracking system like big companies. You might not have a whole team of talent acquisition recruiters. Um, but if you are a single recruiter, you can certainly be conscious of what your biases might be. A framework that I like to use was developed by the Neuro Leadership Institute. It's called the SEEDS model, and there are 5 groupings of bias. It's similarity, expedience, experience, distance, and safety bias. And you can use that as a bit of a mental checklist, kind of just as you're about to interview somebody, you can kind of say, okay, which of these biases might be triggering for me at the moment? There's a little tip there for you. Catherine?
Yeah, and I think just to give you some, I'm just conscious of also wanting to share some experiences of, I guess, things that I've done in my own company as a small business. So, in the summer just gone, we went through the recruitment press process to take on a new role. It was a completely new role for the company, and it was the first time that we'd done the full recruitment process in that way. And it was quite an interesting journey for me and my team because we all came to the table with what we knew and what we experienced, but we were very much aware that there was a lot of inequalities in the whole system. So I was quite privileged enough being the company director and having the resources to almost say, okay, let's rip up the rule book and let's just start again. And that led to us implementing changes from the very beginning, whereby we were then able to attract really diverse talent. We made the whole process as inclusive as possible. And that really ranged from doing things like we looked at the application process, and we were like, what are we actually asking for here? You know, do we need CVs? Do we need all of this information off the CVs? And we really did that work as a team to question, well, why are we asking that? And do we need that? And are we presenting the most inclusive way for applicants to give us that information? So one of the things that we did as a team, which actually turned out to be quite a fun thing to do, is we were aware that sometimes uh, people may just want to have a look at the physical space that they're going to be working in even before they come in. They also might want to see who are the people that I'm going to be working with. So we spent time and we made a short video. We did like a walking talking video through our office. This is where you're going to be working. This is where the kitchen is. I did a hi, I'm Catherine, I'm the company director. The manager of the person also did a video just to introduce themselves. And then we put that video out as part of the recruitment package, and we got such good feedback because a lot of people talked about it reduced their anxiety in terms of them knowing where the space was going to be, where they were then going to come for the interview. But then we also had the option to do video interviews over writing an application. Certainly for me, having dyslexia, sometimes it is a bit of a challenge having to write that much information. I always say to me, like, back in the day when I used to have to apply for jobs, it felt like an essay, things that you were doing. It's a certain skill set that you had to have. But, sit me down in front of someone and ask me those questions and get me to talk about them verbally. It's not quite the same cognitive overload for me. So it was a really good experience and positive experience for me as a small business owner to trial some of these things, the things that we did try and we're like, actually, we won't do that again. Do you know what I mean? And I think it was just to
We lost Catherine, or is it just me?
I've
I
lost her as
thought it was
well.
me, but I think it must be Catherine.
No, I think she has frozen, unfortunately. I'll try and message her.
Oh
Oh,
no,
Oh,
I'm
no,
back now.
you're
are
back.
you
Sorry.
Yeah.
back?
Sorry, as I was mid-flow. Yeah, so what I was saying is it's just I always say to the kind of new business owners, like, take that leap and do things differently. I think it is part and parcel as an entrepreneur. You're failing every day, and it's just part and parcel of the job. That is what innovation is. You're going to trial something. And I think it's also around lifting the voices of others. So part of that process was we worked with a few different people from different community groups and organizations, even just where we put out the adverts and stuff. We went, we kind of moved away from your kind of traditional household name recruitment job boards, and actually we went back to the community, and it was community groups that members of the team that were already in. And like I said, we kind of came out of that process being like, that really worked for us. We got the applications, we definitely got more than we anticipated. And I think it just made that whole experience for me quite a positive one, and one that, we now feel confident using moving forward.
Catherine, Toby.
Yes.
Firstly, it's lovely to see you both. I think Catherine, I've met you at another Pro
Yes.
Manchester event before even. You were speaker then as well. So it's lovely to see you again. And Toby, lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for everything you've talked us through so far. I had a question kind of around DI washing, I guess, kind of what Toby alluded to earlier. So as you've probably both experienced as well, sometimes kind of really formulistic, kind of DEI washing presentations, I guess, can actually be quite degrading when you go in as a kind of participant, and you can see that kind of they're not really genuine and they're trying to tick certain boxes. I guess an example, for example, was when I went to a Magic Circle kind of event that focused on neurodiversity, but they didn't have any neurodivergent speakers, at least not openly neurodivergent ones, kind of throughout the whole day. The panel that they had kind of after lunch, when I asked them whether they kind of had learned anything about neurodivergence kind of since joining the firm, they couldn't really give anything, and nor could kind of the more senior colleagues that were talking kind of give examples of ways they'd supported neurodivergent kind of individuals or trainees or other kind of juniors that they had mentored. I suppose a problem there I see though is in certain organizations, the reality is they either can't or they just won't really make adjustments for people. They're too busy, or it's just not a priority for them because I think in terms of how they see how the profit should be made, it's just not a priority. Instead, I think they just kind of feel they need to kind of tick boxes in terms of the Equality Act and I guess the Companies Act as well of kind of running their company in a particular way and meeting a kind of particular equality obligations. It's almost kind of if they kind of felt more able to be not at all putting onus away from them, it's still their problem, but it's almost kind of if kind of they felt more open to be more able to be open about the reality rather than having to tick box, then you wouldn't have kind of such farcical and degrading presentations. I was wondering your thoughts on that because I think that's actually quite tricky to manage. And I guess similarly, kind of with, for example, culture fits and kind of people who think whether you want people who think in different ways, think in the same way. Another kind of experiences at certain Brussels Group universities, there's a huge focus to try and kind of recruit students from disadvantaged backgrounds who often can still be recruited through potential. But then at university, they're not given that kind of tailored support to then kind of help them kind of actually reach the same outcomes by the time they graduate, if that makes sense to you both.
Yeah. Do you want me to?
Yeah,
Shall I?
you go first, Toby. Yeah.
Yeah. So I see a lot that there's yeah, there's a lot of window dressing, box ticking, pink washing, greenwashing, you name it, across businesses. The organizations that I think, from my experience, I've worked with over 100 different companies now, um, as an independent person. And what I've noticed is that the businesses that take EDI seriously and benefit from doing it well are the ones where the founder or the chief executive of the company is taking a personal accountability for it. What I often see is the board, if you like, talking the talk. They're not walking the walk, and they just delegate it to whoever's in charge of HR. And all of the pressure and all of the responsibility gets put on whoever's running HR. Um, in a small company, that could be like your office manager. My smallest client has got 16 employees, and it was the office manager who did everything from bookkeeping to hiring and firing, that also did diversity and inclusion stuff as well. So first of all, point number one, founder or chief executive has to be accountable and take personal responsibility for this. Yes, you can delegate that to then your lieutenants, and it should be shared. Marketing should be thinking about how inclusive their marketing campaigns are. People or HR should be thinking about how inclusive the workplace and the recruitment process and everything is. Whoever's in charge of procurement should be thinking about how diverse is your supply chain, for instance. It cuts across every business function. The other thing is that organizations that do this well align EDI to their purpose as a business. It's not treated as this thing on the side of the organization. So I've been working with Chester Zoo recently, and Chester Zoo, their mission is to prevent extinction. And the reason why EDI is so important to their mission is that they've said human beings have created the ecological crisis that we're experiencing right now, and human beings have to be the solution to that. So in order to come up with solutions to prevent extinction, we need diversity of thought. We need diversity of lived experiences. It can't be, for example, a bunch of people doing stuff to the global south. For example, it has to be a co-produced way of working. And also, there are people who just don't feel like they can get involved in zoo life. There are people that just don't see Chester Zoo as being a place that they can go and visit. So Chester Zoo is missing out on a huge amount of people that are potential customers. And that has a detrimental impact on the organization. That is impacting the bottom line. They will be more profitable and more successful if they can attract more people to come and visit the zoo and get involved in all of their programs and activities to prevent extinction. So businesses have to think along the same lines. I've worked with a company that does planning consultancy around planning permission. For them, it's about delivering a better quality of service to their clients. I've worked with hospitals. For them, it's about delivering better patient outcomes. These are really measurable. It's about cutting cancer waiting lists. It's about improving health outcomes for everybody, really impactful stuff. So I would encourage you, whether you employ 2 people or 20 people, think about why do you exist as a business? What is your purpose? What is your mission? And how is EDI going to help you really amplify that and deliver on that? How are you going to bring your values to life? How are you going to function as a high performing team by having that diversity of thought and diversity of perspective and lived experience around the decision making table?
Thanks very much. That's super insightful. I think everything from kind of what you started by talking about corporate governance and kind of it only really works when the leadership takes real accountability and then I guess secondly you were explaining when it's integrated properly into their mission as well.
Just to yeah, and I guess just to add to that, just on a personal note as well, Jen, I always say to people, know that when you go for a job interview, it's also around you interviewing them. And it's also around you kind of taking that step back and being, does this organization line with my values? Or is this going to be an organization that I can go in where those pathways are set up to advance women, black women, um, disabled staff into leadership roles? If those pathways aren't there and you hold that identity, actually, is that a bit of a deal breaker for me? Um, I think one of the things that I found quite liberating when I started my company was just that complete autonomy that I have now as an entrepreneur, being like, this is the path that I want to go. And these are the things that I want to achieve in my career. And actually, I'm going to set up this council of people to help me get there. So even though, I'm the company director, I'm the boss, I'm the person at the top, I still experience challenges day to day, that I have to go to people to ask advice and guidance for. And sometimes the outcomes of those conversations are actually maybe let's not go for that client, or actually, Catherine, let's pivot because ultimately, are you happy going down this direction if these are the challenges or experiences you're going to get along the way? And I think it's something really, a really important question everybody should ask themselves. But I think for those people that are from kind of marginalized groups or do experience different forms of discrimination from an intersectional lens, I always say to people, feel empowered to also find the workplace that fits best for you as well, and do that research, because there are some amazing companies out there where you can see it. It's not just that tick box exercise. I'm doing some work with a Premier League football club at the moment, and the things that they are doing in terms of their new stadium now, one of the most inclusive stadiums I've ever been to from a neurodiversity point of view, the work they're doing to advance women in coaching roles, women across the organisation. And it's groundbreaking stuff in an area that historically wouldn't have done that work, or you just wouldn't have seen that representation. So I think it's there, but it's around then, you saying to yourself, who do I want to go and work for, and do they align with my values as well?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Thank you. I hadn't thought about it that way, and that it's an interview of them as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, thank you for explaining that, and then building on kind of however kind of how it can become so much as well. Kind of how kind of having diversity of thought and having that bravery, you can create really inclusive physical spaces as well. I think you've both talked about that. Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if it's my place, but given I kind of hijacked with a in-person question, I just wanted to point out there are quite a few on the chat as well. I think we had one on kind of how best to oh gosh, I never like it when other people paraphrase my questions. How can we increase engagement of allies? And then a couple of longer ones towards the end as well. But thank you both.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That was a really, really great set of questions to sort of get us started. If it's all right with Catherine and Toby, I can move us on into some of the questions that are in the chat, and then I just have some questions that I'm itching to ask you as well, if that's all right. So if we start with what's in the chat, the first question that came in was, how do we increase engagement of allies, particularly allies that might not identify as part of any diverse group?
Toby, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Um, so with allies, I think first of all, it's about understanding what we actually mean by an ally. To be an ally is a very proactive act, and also you need to put your neck on the line. Being an ally isn't a passive thing. It's what I often see is people wearing like a rainbow lanyard around their neck, and calling themselves an ally. But when it comes down to the crunch, are they willing to put their neck on the line if a colleague, for example, makes a transphobic remark in the workplace? Are they willing to stand up and hold people accountable for making a transphobic or homophobic remark at work? And do they really have the back of their LGBT colleagues? Or are they just saying the words? They're saying, I'm a friend of the LGBTQ plus community, but they're not willing to take bold action. So what being an ally really looks like is speaking up, even when it feels uncomfortable and scary. It's about having the back of your colleagues. It's about sponsoring people, sort of saying, I've noticed that there's somebody and their voice is not being heard. And I want us to make sure that their voice is being heard and that they're represented in this conversation. Calling things out, that's what it means to be an ally. It's not easy, but if we're going to make workplaces better, then we need to be brave and we need to be having these types of conversations.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that always becomes a topic of conversation when I'm delivering training and we talk about allyship, for me, it's about the recognizing of power, privilege, and access to the resources that you may have. And then it's around how can you share those resources. For me, I hold multiple identities that some people may categorize as me being disadvantaged in terms of, holding them identities and living in the UK. But there's also a lot of parts of my identity that actually give me quite a lot of privilege and power. English is my first language, financial stability. I am a UK citizen, I can quite freely travel all around the world. And there's elements of my identity like that where I'm like, actually, I hold a privilege there. So what can I do to exercise that privilege to help others? And sometimes it's not even about just helping others. It's more around recognizing equity. So it's actually around saying, okay, what can I do to make this space a more equitable place? And what do I need to do in terms of maybe that power and privilege that I hold right now? Do I actually maybe just need to give some of that up? Or do I need to share some of that? And I think it's a really, really important thing to, I guess, do that bit of self-reflection. We have kind of talked a lot today about intersectionality, and I think, like Toby was saying, sometimes people just have an automatic go-to thought. It's this, it's this, it's this. You have to be from a marginalised group. But for me, when we're talking about intersectionality, it's any part of your identity that would present or maybe experience some type of discrimination. You know, the fact that I'm Northern, and even from Liverpool, have a Scouse accent, not as strong as others, but you know, that's presented challenges when I've gone in to meetings before, you know, certain stereotypes and things like that. And some of the best kind of allyship I've heard is people kind of calling that out in a meeting and saying, you know, that joke's not appropriate. Or, you know, flipping it on its head and saying, you know, yeah, we love Liverpool, Catherine. Do you know what I mean? And just completely changing it. So for me, when I think about allyship, and if I can offer any advice and guidance, it is to just go away and maybe do that self-reflection on the power and privileges that we all hold because of the multiple identities that we have.
Yeah. Just building on what Catherine said, like Rachel's just put in the chat, the idea of awareness of the privileges you've got without using it as a weapon, but more of a light bulb moment is something I really want to explore. Thanks for giving me the light bulb. So a really useful tool that maybe Rachel could use is kind of the power wheel. It's a really useful practical model. If you imagine it, it's like a dartboard. And you've got like the center of power right in the middle in the bullseye. And then fanning around the edge of that are lots of different characteristics and identities. The closer you are to the center of the wheel, the more power and privilege you hold. So, for example, you know, being male, being white, being straight, being non-disabled, that means that your privileges and power dynamics are closer to the center. But as individuals, we appear at different sections on the board. So, you know, yes, I'm white and male, but I'm also disabled. I'm also part of the LGBT community. So in some contexts and some environments, I hold a lot of privilege and power. In other contexts and other environments, less so. And it's quite a good self-reflection exercise. So I think if you just went online and you Googled the power wheel or power and privilege wheel, it will probably come up. Print it out, you know, just kind of think about where maybe you sit on that wheel. It's a really good sort of introspection tool.
And I think, yeah, and just to add on that as well, I was having a really good conversation with someone in training the other day, and we were talking about actually some identities you're born with, you'll have the whole of your life. Others, you may switch. So when I grew up, I came from, you know, a working class background, single parent, and real financial difficulty. And through me being able to access education and utilize that access to all of the opportunities and the resources, the different opportunities that I've had throughout my career. I'm now not in that same kind of category in terms of I don't quite think I can class myself as working class anymore, which for me has been quite a interesting thing to kind of discuss or almost go through because I still feel I have that mentality. But actually, if we were just to look at class and we talk about it from like a postcode perspective, okay, can't really wear that badge anymore, can't really hold that identity, but there's a still part of me that feels it. And, you know, the same with like financial security, you know, the things and the challenges that I had when I first started employment are completely different now because of my financial circumstances. So I think also to say, you know, when we are talking about that kind of intersection and the different challenges some people may face, sometimes it might be that some people are born with certain differences or from particular backgrounds, but some things may come and may go depending on your life experiences as well.
Thank you. That's such a brilliant way to think about it, and I think some really tangible tools that people can take away. I love the power wheel. We've been using it a bit in our organization recently, and it's just a really great opportunity to see where you sit on that wheel, and also to be able to open up conversations with other people about where they sit and how that affects decision making and things like that. So thank you both. We only have 2 minutes left. I cannot believe how fast this has gone, but I am wondering if I can have one more question from the chat to ask you. It's quite a long one, so apologies, but I'm going to try to paraphrase it. This question says, we all have multiple identities, but not all of them are protected characteristics, class being one of them. And there's a tension where the focus is on diversity and inclusion and not equity, but equity is really the bedrock of being truly inclusive. So how do we embed equity into intersectionality, where often one tries to serve all, and equity starts with targeted support and intentionality? So if we can end on that one, that could be quite powerful, I think.
I can kick off if you want, Catherine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll keep it brief. Um, so point number one is that diversity includes all of us. It's not just the 9 protected characteristics. I run a workshop called Diversity Includes Everyone, and one of the first things that we talk about is almost like this iceberg picture, where you have your visible characteristics above the waterline. 10% of the iceberg is above the waterline. That could be your ethnicity, could be your physical disability, that kind of thing. But actually, so much of our identity is hidden underneath the waterline, these invisible characteristics. And one of the things people often think, well, diversity doesn't relate to me. Like I'm quote unquote not diverse enough. I don't tick the right boxes. That is such a false understanding. We are all diverse in one way or another. So we have to shift the conversation over to inclusivity. And that's about respect, belonging, empowerment, and progression. And you're right, we need to be thinking about equity. And equality is about fairness, it's about treating everybody the same. Unfortunately, we don't live in a fair society. A number of us have got additional barriers that we have to face to get to work. We have to focus on equity, and that's about trying to level the playing field. It's about seeing the individual, giving the individual the specific support and resources that they need in order to perform at their best. And we need to ladder up. So we start with equity, then we can create a culture of inclusion, and then we're in a much stronger position to be able to attract and recruit and retain diversity within our businesses.
I think what do I want to leave everybody with no seconds left to spare. I think for me, Toby's covered quite a lot of it there, but I think one of the most important things for me that I always try and instill in all of my staff is that feeling of I can is more important than IQ. And I always want my staff to feel comfortable enough to be their true authentic self, be able to come to work, to thrive, have that diversity of thought, and always know that they're coming into an environment where it doesn't matter kind of how society treats them or how society views them. They're coming into a really psychologically safe workspace. And for those of you who are on the call who are leaders and who are managers, that is the responsibility that we have. And I think just simply taking ownership on that and making sure that you make it your own call to action. What are the little things that I can do every day, as well as the bigger, wider strategy? I think that is the difference then to people coming to work and feeling safe and happy. And yeah, and that for me is when you have that environment, that is when equity happens because everybody is just thriving.
That is such a brilliant place to end it. I mean, I can't believe how fast this hour has gone. Thank you both for your time. There's about 100 more things I'd love to talk to you about, but thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who joined in online. I believe Pro Manchester will be sharing a recording of this as soon as it's ready. So if you know anyone who'd really benefit from this conversation but wasn't able to be here, please share that with them. And before I leave, I just want to thank our speakers one more time. And Taz, not to put you on the spot, but is there anything from a Pro Manchester perspective you'd like to say?
No, I think everything's been covered. I just wanted to reiterate thank you to the speakers. I think from the chat, it seems that everyone's enjoyed the sessions. Hopefully everyone found it beneficial and can take something away from it and put it into your own businesses or your own workplace. Yeah. Thank you everyone for coming.
Brilliant.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
everyone.